Welcome to Felony Friday, a presentation of the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, John Odermatt.
Felons, friends, and freedom lovers, welcome back to another edition of Felony Friday, a weekly show right here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. Of course, Felony Friday is a show where we focus on the criminal justice system, or more accurately, the injustice system that so many people suffer from in this country. This show, Felony Friday, it's about exposing this broken system, of course, but it's also about, as you've heard in the past, longtime listeners of this show know that felons come on this show and share their personal stories, their stories of overcoming obstacles and fighting their way to become successful after prison. But it's also about really examining changes in the law. And in this case, today's episode is going to be about one of those such changes. In this case, a very positive change. My guest today, we're going to be talking about the recent bill that signed into law that legalizes industrialized hemp and the effect on the industry, most notably CBD oils and those types of products, and if they're legal, how they're regulated, things like that. This is a really exciting, informative episode, so you don't want to miss it. You might want to grab a pencil and a notepad so you can keep track of the stuff that my guests and I talk about today, or you can just go to lionsofliberty.com/FF158. That's where all the notes and links and stuff that my guest is going to reference today and we're going to talk about. You can find all that stuff there on the show notes page because this is episode 158 of Felony Friday. So let's get rolling right into today's show. My guest today on Felony Friday is Mike Maharrey. Mike serves as the National Communications Director for the 10th Amendment Center. He's written 3 books: Our Last Hope, Rediscovering the Lost Path to Liberty; Smashing Myths, Understanding Madison's Notes on Nullification. And for his 3rd book, Mike teamed up with 10th Amendment Center Executive Director Michael Bolden in writing Nullification Objections, Dismantling the Opposition. Last time Mike was on this show, that was back on episode 135, we talked about his fight with local authorities in Lexington, Kentucky, about their growing use of surveillance cameras in that area. And this time we plan to talk about most of the show about CBD oil. Obviously, it's in the news right now in December with hemp being legalized, and we'll talk through the benefits of CBD and the regulatory environment today, the changes there that we're seeing in that market. So, Mike, welcome back to Felony Friday.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Well, thank you for coming on the show, man, and thank you for all that you do in your fight, your work for the 10th Amendment Center. And, I look forward to picking your brain, and I know, a lot of my listeners, when I posted about this, are looking forward to hearing about CBD and what's going on right now and what the future is. So we'll get into all that stuff. I want to spend most of the show on that. Before we do that, what's the update since, it's been several months since I talked to you last on the battle you're waging against local authorities there in Lexington. So what's new in that situation?
Yeah, I'm still fighting with local authorities here in Lexington. We've now entered into the 2nd year of the legal process, which I guess is evidence that the wheels of justice grind slowly. I don't remember specifically where we were when we actually did the interview, but just to give people a quick overview, I did some open records requests actually in the summer of 2017 now, trying to get information about cameras that the Lexington Police Department are using. They're super secret cameras, and they don't want to give any information about them. And so I did an open records request, and they denied the information. And so then I appealed to the state attorney general, and the state attorney general sided with me, told the city to hand over the information. The city instead decided to sue me. So then we entered into the court foray, which was in the October of 2017 is when the lawsuit actually started. And in that time, I have won twice in circuit court here in Fayette County. And now the city of Lexington still doesn't want to give up the information that they've been told 3 times to give to me now. And so we're going to the Kentucky Court of Appeals. And so right now we're basically just in the process. The the city has filed its appeal, and we're working on our response. I think it has to be in at the end of this month. So I fully expect if we talk again in the fall, this will still be going on. It's gotten to the point of being absurd.
So, I mean, what's the end game here? Is this for you to win? I guess what would have to happen? Or
well, ultimately, the city needs to turn over the information that I want, which is basically what these cameras are, how they're using them, how they're handling the information. Just basic oversight and transparency, as far as I'm concerned. And again, it's the circuit court has twice ruled in my favor and said that they're trying to hide it under some exceptions in the open records law, and they're not doing a very good job of it. But I guess they're going with the if at first you don't succeed, try again method. So they're hoping the Court of Appeals will do something different. I don't think it will. And then I fully expect if they lose at the appellate level, it'll probably go to the state Supreme Court. And then if the Supreme Court sides with me, then they'll have to turn over the documents, and we'll get to see what they've been hiding.
Okay, well, that'll be interesting to continue to watch. And what's your website? You're tracking all that stuff you have a website for it, right?
Yeah, we see you watching Lexington.com. So that's all spelled out, one big long word. We see you watching Lexington.com. Yeah.
I'll link to that in the show notes page as well. So be sure everyone who didn't, well, you could go back and listen to that last episode, 135. Go back and listen. I'll link to that in the show notes page, and you can also go to we see you watching Lexington.com.
Yep.
Is that right? Okay.
You got it.
And I'll link to that on the show notes as well. So let's talk about CBD. I know a lot of my listeners are libertarians. They're probably very familiar with CBD and what it is. But for anybody out there who's not, let's kind of start at that level. Just a basic, it doesn't have to be long-winded, but what is CBD oil? Where's it come from? What's it made up of?
So it's a substance that is derived from the cannabis plant. It is typically made from hemp, which means that it doesn't have the THC, which is the ingredient that makes you high in marijuana. So it's not a psychopathic type of substance, but it has been shown to have a lot of medical benefits, particularly in treating seizures, in dealing with things like anxiety, and then also inflammation and pain management. There's actually, real clinical research that has shown this to be effective. And then there are countless people that are using it right now and finding a relief from various ailments. So, like I said, it doesn't make you high, but it does come from the hemp plant, or it can also come from actual marijuana plants. But typically what you see sold commercially here in the United States does not have any THC in it, or very low levels.
Yeah, I remember I think one of Ron Paul's final speeches from the House floor when he was, I forget the name of the speech, but there was like 50 things that he went through and named. It was like, what if, or something like that. I'm totally blanking on it. But one thing he was talking about was hemp. What if hemp was legal? And we did, I think we actually broke down that speech and wrote articles about it back then. And I remember researching hemp, and one of the facts of it, if you wanted to get high on hemp from the THC in it, from the hemp plant, you would have to smoke a telephone pole, basically a telephone pole size joint of it to get high. So
yeah, the prohibition on hemp is one of the most absurd policies, and that's saying a lot considering all of the absurd policies our federal government has come up with. Mm-hmm. But while maintaining prohibition from producing hemp here in the United States is the number one importer of hemp products, primarily from China and Canada. So can't grow it here, but by golly, we're going to import that stuff from other countries. And hemp has over 25,000 uses, not just the CBD. I think that's probably the best known and probably the most commercially valuable at this point. But it's also used for paper. It can be used to make actually like panels for cars, clothing. It's additive for food. There's nutritional value in hemp seeds. There's all kinds of things. Biofuels. It's an amazing plant. And the fact that the federal government, up until just a few months ago, basically maintained complete prohibition on growing the plant in the United States is just dumb, is the only word I can come up with.
Yeah, well, there's probably some corruption involved there. I mean,
yeah.
I think I forget the story, but even from the outset, there was a machine invented that processed these hemp plants really quickly. I forget what it was called, but I think wasn't the cotton industry involved in somehow?
Yeah, if you go back to the beginnings of hemp prohibition, which actually was after World War II, there was a huge hemp. Hemp was a big factor in, that hemp to victory. Hemp was a big thing during World War II. It was made for ropes and various things. It was really after that they cracked down. And when you look at the entities that were behind pushing for the ban on hemp production, you find paper companies who had to, timber that didn't want to compete with hemp. And then DuPont was heavily involved because some of the chemical type things that can be done with hemp. And so you see these big corporations once again using the power of the federal government to protect their own markets.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I've seen, I don't know if this is entirely true, but I think back, I don't know, in the early 1900s, Henry Ford built a car out of hemp. I think that's true. Like I said, they actually use, I believe it's Toyota that uses hemp panels in the Toyota Camry. So, it's like I said, amazingly versatile, a very green plant. It's carbon friendly if you're an environmentalist and you care about, green type plants. There's a guy here in Kentucky that has developed a process that combines hemp with coal that creates a much cleaner burning coal. Wow.
And he's basically been locked out of being able to produce this up until recently. So we'll see what happens with the federal ban lifted.
Yeah, I don't know what your feelings would be on this, but when I look at cannabis prohibition ending, eventually, the cannabis prohibition around THC and psychoactives will end as well, I think.
Yes.
But I think really the hemp prohibition ending is probably going to have a bigger economic impact as a whole, just based on how flexible the hemp plant is. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so too. You have a lot of states. Kentucky's a prime example, and I live here in the Bluegrass State, and the agricultural economy was decimated with the crackdown on tobacco. This was a tobacco-based agricultural economy. Hemp grows. Kentucky was one of the number one hemp growing states in the United States up until the federal government decided to ban it. And so there's tremendous potential, especially with what we're seeing, the development of CBD, and then of course all of the other potential things that you can do with hemp. There's a huge market for this plant. I think once markets really get going without the fear of any type of federal regulation, that you'll see even more things developed using hemp plants. So I really do. I think it's going to be a huge economic boom for a lot of agricultural states. And I'm really excited about it. I've got a lot of friends that have been involved in this industry for a long time. They're excited about it. They see the potential to make money. And on the other side of that, where there's the potential to make money, that means there's people that are going to benefit from these products and, medications and all of the things that can come out of this, because, where there's money, there's markets, and that means people want this stuff.
Absolutely. So let's dive into CBD a little bit. And before we get into the regulatory side of it, I know we talked beforehand and you've had some personal experience with it. So if you wouldn't mind sort of sharing your story with CBD.
Yeah, absolutely. I have very severe osteoarthritis in my hip. It was diagnosed a number of years ago, and then it got significantly worse last summer. And I also play hockey. I'm a goalie and I play ice hockey. And it had gotten to the point where I really was having a hard time playing with the issue with my hip. But I'm just not at the point that I want to, go through hip replacement and do surgery. So went to the doctor, got some x-rays to see how bad it was. It's bad. And started doing physical therapy and just trying to come up with a regimen that will allow me to function relatively normally with less pain. And one of the things that was suggested was that I try CBD oil. And so I thought, well, why not?
Was that suggested by your doctor or just?
No, actually it was suggested by a friend of mine who is in that business. She said, hey, this is something that's helped a lot of people. It might be beneficial for you. And at that point I started doing some research, started reading about it, found out it does indeed. There actually are clinical tests that show that it is beneficial for people with inflammation and pain. And so, I started doing it I guess it's probably been about 3 months now. And I honestly have completely weaned myself off of the Tylenol and the ibuprofen and the Aleve. I'm not taking anything at all
That's
other
great.
than the CBD. And I've got bone-on-bone arthritis, and I'm playing hockey. So, I still have some pain. I'm not pain-free. I'm never going to be pain-free, but it has certainly worked. And, some people might say, well, it's all in your head. Well, I don't care where it is, as long as it doesn't hurt. The hard part for me was kind of trying to figure out the dosing. Dosing with CBD is kind of confusing. There's some pretty good websites out there that people can go to, but finding the amount that works for what you need it to work for is kind of tricky with the various products. But I went to a retail store, brick and mortar place that had some folks in there that were pretty knowledgeable, and they kind of helped me figure that out. And it's been smooth sailing. There's no side effects. It's great. I'm a big believer in it. And, I think the proof is in the pudding. You can come to Lexington and watch me play hockey with a bunch of other old men. You can see it works.
That's awesome. So with the dosing, just to touch on that again, is it just, would you say it's sort of dependent on the intended use? You need to, if, for example, is it maybe more dosing for more inflammation you have and less for more of a minor injury, or is that?
I don't know the rhyme or reason. My approach to it was I started with the really low dose, and then kind of built until I got to the point where I felt like that there was real effect. And I did some research again. The difficulty is that different hemp products have different concentration of actual CBD. So you have to figure out how many milligrams you're getting in a dropper of the product that you choose. That was kind of the tricky part for me. But there's some formulas out there that help you. And then I kind of looked and what was suggested for inflammation was between a certain range. I started at the low end of that and kind of built up to it. And I feel like at this point that it's working for me. So.
How do you take it? Because I know you can get it in capsules, you can get it in the oil in the dropper form. People put it in their coffee. How do you take it?
I do the oil under the tongue.
Okay.
And then I've also got a cream, which is if anybody's used like BioFreeze or one of those products that kind of gives you the cold effect. It's actually a concoction that is BioFreeze type stuff in topical kind of thing. And then every once in a while, I'll get like the gummies and chew on one of those like right after a game if I kind of want to up the dosage a little bit.
Okay. Well, that's definitely interesting. And I'm actually got a bottle of I think it's called Charlotte's Web, the CBD oil for my wife for Christmas. So she's dealing with some issues with her neck and with her shoulder, doing physical therapy for that. So I'm excited to see her experiment with that and see how it works.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, I'm anecdotal clearly, but it has definitely worked for me because like I said, I was popping ibuprofen and Aleve pretty frequently and I haven't had any at all. I'm not even taking it after I play anymore. So, and granted I'm doing physical therapy and there's some other things that, I think it's part of a broader treatment. And I would definitely recommend anybody. I'm not giving health advice. I'm not a doctor. I'd recommend talking to your physician and doing your due diligence and research. But there's plenty of information out there, and even the Wikipedia page is really interesting. I had no idea that your body has a cannabinol system, that there's receptors that CBD attaches to. Like this exists in your body. This is a known fact. I had no clue. So. Definitely worth doing some research on that just to kind of inform yourself.
Yeah, so it would make sense that you could supplement with it. I mean, it's crazy. This stuff was prohibited, but
right.
Anyway, so let's get into that because now it's not, or is it still prohibited? Because it's kind of confusing.
It is extremely confusing, the legal environment right now. So let me just I think probably the easiest thing to do is just let me run down what the Farm Bill did and what it didn't do. So up until Trump signed the Farm Bill, hemp was only legal within a research program or a pilot program that was run by a state where they had legalized it and created the process. Up until the new Farm Bill, it was technically illegal to sell hemp commercially, and this included CBD and any type of hemp products that were domestically made. Now, the cool thing is, all those products were out there. I mean, you can walk into, shops in California and get a cup of coffee with CBD in it. And you could do this before the 2014 bill was signed. So as states began to open up markets for hemp, a lot of them basically finally just said, you know what, we're going to ignore the federal law completely. We're going to allow commercial sales. And, a number of states did this. I think there were 17 states total that were just flat out authorizing commercial sale of hemp products and CBD. So, this is the power of what we call nullification at the 10th Amendment Center. When states quit enforcing federal law, a lot of times it just doesn't get enforced because the federal government lacks the resources, it lacks the personnel, and it just can't do it. So, when you've got hundreds of places in California where you can walk in and buy CBD or medical marijuana for that matter, it doesn't matter what the federal government says or what the DEA wants to do. It's very limited in its ability to enforce its laws. And I really think that the Farm Bill that passed in 2018 that legalized hemp federally is really a function of state taking action first. I don't think it would have ever happened if states hadn't just finally said, you know what, screw you feds, we're going to do this anyway. The feds are playing follow the leader. It's like the tail wagging the dog, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that's important to understand. But when Trump signed the bill, basically what it did was it removed hemp from the list of federal controlled substances. So from now on, hemp will be treated federally as an agricultural commodity. And in fact, it's now, hemp farmers will now be eligible for all of the loans and stupid unconstitutional federal agricultural programs that exist out there. So it's going to be treated like any other crop, like tomatoes or corn or soybeans or whatever. So that's great news. Now, it doesn't change state regulations. States could still choose to completely ban hemp if they wanted to. They'd be dumb, but they could do it. But from a federal standpoint, there'll be no more DEA enforcement. It's no longer on the controlled substances list. And in fact, the way the definition of hemp is written in the Farm Bill, it does include CBD and food additives. So as far as the DEA is concerned, hemp is completely legal throughout the United States. Where things get murky and confusing, particularly in the realm of CBD, is we also have another agency that we love to hate, the Food and Drug Administration. Mm-hmm. And according to the FDA, it regulates CBD as a drug. And in the eyes of the FDA, CBD is still completely illegal and completely regulated by this federal agency. And they do it on the basis of that there have been a number of clinical trials using CBD for medical purposes. In fact, there's now one prescription medication that uses CBD to treat seizures. And so as a result, once you have a prescription drug using a substance, and once you have research, clinical trials that are overseen by the FDA, once that happens, then the FDA basically claims the power to regulate that drug. And when it does so, it claims that it can no longer be marketed as a supplement. It has to be marketed as a drug. So all of these folks that are out there selling CBD in basically every state in the country that are marketing as, and that's kind of the way they do it. They say, we're not making any medical claims, this is a food supplement, et cetera, et cetera. According to the FDA, they can't do it. So the bottom line is, according to the federal government, according to the FDA, CBD is still completely illegal, both in terms of selling it as oil and also any food product that has CBD in it, according to the FDA, is completely illegal. So, my response to that is, yeah, so what? Because like I said, there are stores right here in Lexington. There's a store in the mall now where I can walk in and buy CBD products.
So have you heard of any individual stores or online retailers or anything being targeted or shut down or anything happening with the FDA?
Yeah, there have been some FDA enforcement efforts. If you go to their website, they talk about being very concerned about this proliferation of FDA. And you can actually go on their website and you can find where they've sent letters. It's primarily been online retailers at this point that they've sent cease and desist letters to. telling them it's illegal and to stop selling it. So there have been some efforts, like the federal efforts to regulate marijuana in states where it's been legal. It's been relatively feckless. The real test is going to be, will the states stand up and ignore the FDA when the FDA comes along? Because what's going to happen, I can almost guarantee you, is the FDA is going to come to the states and say, hey, you guys need to get this under control and crack down on this. And if the states go along and start enforcing the will of the FDA, then you may see some severe restrictions on CBD in the future. If states do what they did with hemp to start with and basically say, okay, FDA, if you want to enforce it yourself, then I think the status quo will continue and the market will continue to grow. It's really going to depend on what happens at the state level. And something that's kind of disturbing is not too long ago, California, their food and regulatory agency, I can't remember the name of it, but they actually came along and said, hey, in California, we're going to enforce the federal law. So, they sent some agents and did some cease and desist. And of course, you can still walk into pretty much any place in LA and get CBD. So that even hasn't been real effective. But there certainly is the potential for there to be some type of crackdown. And something that's kind of disturbing is I've got a really good friend here in Kentucky that has been involved in hemp industry for a long time. She sells CBD along with other hemp products. And Facebook just deplatformed her. And apparently has deplatformed some other hemp companies, basically saying, well, you can't sell drugs. And so you have to wonder, is this coming from the FDA? Is this coming from the pharmaceutical industry? There has to be pressure from somewhere else that's coming down on Facebook, trying to snuff out these retailers. So I'm concerned about the potential for more regulation, but I really think if people just stand their ground, particularly at the state level, and I don't think that the FDA is going to be able to crack down in the way they maybe want to. And what will ultimately happen is they'll back off.
Do you think that the CBD is sort of a template for what could happen with marijuana? Because marijuana is going to be in the same boat if it becomes federally legalized and the prohibition ends, because it's been used as a drug, right?
No, absolutely.
So is there a precedent? Is there anything else you can think of that was used as a drug and then is also used as a supplement that's been in this same murky situation?
I really can't. But then again, my knowledge more broadly as far as pharmaceuticals and health type products goes is limited. I would say there probably has been. My friend Robert Scott Bell, he'd be somebody who would really know more about this. He's a homeopath and deals with this stuff on a daily basis in his work. But marijuana is definitely going to be in the same boat. Right now, the federal government claims that marijuana has no use. It's Schedule I. It's not medically beneficial. At some point, they're going to legalize marijuana. And then you have to wonder, well, what's the FDA going to do? The federal government wants to control everything. So if they can't control it one way, they're going to try to figure out a way to control it another. And really, the bottom line is it's up to us, those of us who want the freedom to choose. If you want to use CBD, that's great. If you don't want to use it, if you think it's dangerous, don't use it. Mm-hmm. Those of us who want to control our own lives, to control what we put in our bodies, to control our own health, we have to be willing to stand up and basically say, federal government, we're not going to put up with you interfering. We're going to do what we want to do. As my friend Robert Scott Bell always says, stop asking permission where none is required. And I think that's the attitude we have to take. And we have to insist that our state regulators and our state legislators take that same approach. Because like I said, if the states don't enforce it, it's not going to get enforced. If the states go along with the feds, then we're going to have problems.
Yeah, and I'm sure there will be some states. I mean, you've said California was already making moves to enforce it. So there will probably be a push and pull back and forth. And
right.
I don't know. I would be shocked with hemp being legalized, industrial hemp being legalized. It's going to be so plentiful. You would think that would drive down the cost of producing CBD. It's just going to become impossible to keep it from people.
Yeah, that's what I think. That's really the power. We can talk about political nullification and we can talk about, the enforcement mechanism. The bottom line is markets are powerful. And when people want something and that market develops, it's very, very difficult to put a lid on it once it happens. The feds can keep something limited while it's still limited, but once it blossoms up out of that pot, pun intended, it becomes very difficult for the federal government to put the lid back on and control it. And so, you look at alcohol prohibition, that was an abysmal failure because people weren't going to stop drinking. And I think at this point, people like me, I'm not going to stop using CBD. I'm going to figure out a way to get it. And I know plenty of people who are going to continue to produce it. So, I think the feds face a difficult road if they really want to try to crack down. But, it's government, so they probably will try.
I actually just got a real-time text message here. I posted on Facebook. I was having you on for any questions. And the question is with regards to the U.S. financial system. I know you mentioned before with the passage of this farm bill, now it's easier for credit card companies, PayPal, et cetera, to transact with CBD. How does that – obviously that helps, but if states were to step in and make it illegal, could you have where you could maybe buy CBD products in Pennsylvania, but if the producers in Ohio, they can't sell to New York, or I mean, is that a real threat?
Yeah, I think that if the FDA does have any success cracking down, it's going to be with the interstate commerce with internet companies because they're easier to find and target. They're going to have a much harder time regulating the shop where I get my CBD down the street. I mean, it's one shop, so they're going to have a lot harder time finding her. As far as the banking regulations and stuff go, with it no longer being a controlled substance, regardless of what the FDA does, I don't think that they'll be able to bring the banking system to bear like they have with marijuana. We're basically, if you're a marijuana business, you have to operate in cash because, you can't, the credit cards won't process, the banks won't take your money because, essentially the federal government's using the Federal Reserve to keep a lid on those financial transactions. With hemp being legalized, I don't think that will be a possibility. So it's basically going to be the FDA doing cease and desist and trying to fine and prosecute companies that are illegally selling hemp. And good with that, considering how many companies there already are.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So with that, I think we're going to move on from CBD. And I do want to play, I told you about a game we play on this show called Is It a Crime and Should They Do Time? And essentially what I'm going to do is tell you about something that's occurred, someone who's been charged with a crime, explain the circumstances of what happened, and then you can weigh in if you think it should be a crime, and if so, if they should do any time or anything like that, what the punishment should be or could be.
Cool.
So we'll start out. This is in the Hudson Valley, so up in New York. And there's a woman up there, 32-year-old woman, who she pretended to be a 15-year-old homeless student and tried to enroll at a local high school. And she was arrested. This was at the end of December 28th. She was arrested and charged with first-degree offering a false instrument for filing, a Class C felony, first-degree falsifying business records, a Class C felony, and third-degree criminal trespass, a Class B misdemeanor. So in this situation, somebody, pretends they're someone they're not, tries to get into a high school, some 30-year-old woman. Is this a crime, and should there be a punishment? Should she do time?
That's a good one. It's not as easy. I thought, this will be easy. My first impulse is that you have a government institution that shouldn't exist. So, my inner anarchist comes out and says that really none of this should even be able to happen because you shouldn't have public schools to begin with. But I guess that's neither here nor there. I guess you could make a case. Here's, I guess, I want to know who the victim is. Mm-hmm. In my view, for there to be a victim, for there to be a crime, there has to be a victim. And we're really not looking to punish people. We're really looking for actual justice where the cost that crime has imposed upon another party is paid back. In this situation, I don't understand who's really been hurt. I mean, you can say the school's been hurt. Like I said, I don't think the school should exist. I think in general, fraud would be something that would be punishable because you can use fraud and there can be a victim of fraud. If you say you're something that you're not, in order to get me to provide you some service or to give you some asset, then certainly I would be a victim, and in that case there would be a crime. But in this case, an institution that I don't really think legitimately should exist is the quote unquote victim. So, I'm kind of sympathetic to this woman, but in general, I think you could make a case that fraud would be a crime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, certainly, charging her with a felony and, saddling her with that for life is not going to help this woman who obviously has some problems.
Right.
But if we did break this down and we made it a private school, private schools could have their own, do have their own requirements and age limits and et cetera. Problem solved. She tries to enroll, they figure it out, she's out the door. And that's
exactly, and I guess theoretically in a private legal system, if the school wanted to, it could go after her for whatever cost it incurred in educating her. But I mean, who in their right mind really would? Only the state would come up with something like that to want to punish somebody in that situation.
Absolutely. Well, the second one here is also interesting. I think I know how you're going to weigh in, but it's still interesting discussion. So this is out in Colorado, and an Evergreen, Colorado man got charged. No, he was convicted. It was a felony conviction for illegal outfitting activities. So what this guy was doing essentially was hunting mountain lion, I guess, without the proper permits. It is legal to hunt mountain lion in several states as long as you have the proper permits and it's during the state mandated season. This guy was doing it out of season. He was also contracting his services to other people and helping them to hunt mountain lion and process them. So he ended up being charged with, I think at the end of the day, he's lost his Second Amendment rights. He's prohibited from ever possessing a firearm. And I think he has 2 years of supervised probation. And yeah, I think that's it. So no jail time. So with all of this, with knowing what's happened here, should this guy, Andrew Pashley, did a crime occur here? And should there be any punishment, any time?
Yeah, I didn't think in the big picture there was no crime. I mean, the crime was again against the state. Well, who's the victim? Nobody's the victim, and the state's just mad because he didn't get the right permit. And so, from that pure perspective, I don't think that type of crime should exist. This is another example of something I think that would be solved with private property rights. Mm-hmm. If in a world where people control their own private property and there's not this blanket institution that's trying to dictate everything for everybody, you might have a plot of land and you might be, hey, hunt away, come on my land and hunt mountain lions, and follow my rules on my property. And if you don't follow the rules, then there would be recourse in a legal system. But another person might say, I'm not going to let you on my property at all. So really, this is a private property issue to me, and the state coming in and imposing its will on all property everywhere, I think is pretty absurd. And so there's my inner decentralizer coming in.
So I agree with you. Private property is the answer in our current environment, where we do have hunting seasons and whatnot. If you hunt outside of those seasons, you can be charged with a crime and convicted. Do you think there should be any penalty for poaching and going outside of those limits? Is there something morally wrong with that?
I don't trust that bureaucrats are really capable of understanding and knowing when somebody should and should not hunt. I guess I'm skeptical of this central control imposition of an idea of when, this day it's okay to hunt and this day it's not okay to hunt. And if you hunt this day, then you're going to be locked in a cage or at least have your Second Amendment rights stripped away. Mm-hmm. But if you hunt on this day, that's cool. The centralized controlling aspect of government, I don't trust it. So it's hard for me. I think you could make some moral cases for overhunting and those type of things, but I'm not sure how you enforce that by edict, particularly by government bureaucrats. And maybe I'm being a little bit too wary of government, but I don't think so.
I don't think so either. And I don't have it in front of me, but there was something recently, I forget, it might have been an executive order. It couldn't have been, because then that would have passed through. But what Trump was trying to do, I think out in in Wyoming was legalize the hunting or end the prohibition of hunting of grizzly bears, because there's so many of them now. They're
Right.
really, I don't know if they've passed the threshold for being endangered or not, but at least in that area, there's so many that they're starting to cause problems, and it becomes a public safety issue. So now you have government creating this public safety issue because they're not letting these sweet old grizzly bears that'll tear you apart. They're not letting them be hunted. But yeah, but it's private property solves it. I guess I'm just having trouble with how do we get from where we are right now to that private property society, and it's hard to even envision the path. Like, for example, talking about CBD and legalizing marijuana, I can see that path happening. Definitely in our lifetime, but with getting private property straightened out, I can't see the path forward in our lifetime.
That's why I'm a big advocate of decentralization. And, I would much rather see a state impose its hunting regulations as opposed to having some type of federal regulations that apply, over however many millions of square miles that encompasses the United States. And then from the state level, I'd rather see it move down to the county level and then ultimately down to the individual level. But I think the key to more liberty from a practical standpoint is decentralizing, devolving power away from central authorities and dispersing them among multiple jurisdictions, because then those jurisdictions have to compete against each other. You can see where this did not work over here and this worked great over here, and you have competition just like you do in a regular marketplace. And obviously that's not a perfect system either, but I really feel like that decentralization is the path forward. And that's really, the work of the 10th Amendment Center is focused on devolving power away from the federal government back to the states. States aren't perfect. You don't have to tell me about that. But again, it's much better to have 50 states making regulations on hemp than it is to have universal federal prohibition. And so, we're kind of the first step toward liberty at the 10th Amendment Center. Decentralize things away from Washington, D.C., devolve down to the state level, then devolve it down to the county level, and then ultimately we want to devolve it down to the individual level.
Awesome. Mike, thank you so much for coming back on the show. If you could just tell people where they can find your work at the 10th Amendment Center or your work anywhere else, just plug away. I know you have a bunch of podcasts as well that you do.
Yeah, I got all kinds of stuff. So the main place I want people to go check out is 10thamendmentcenter.com, and you spell out 10th. And there you'll see all of our work. There's an article there that gives an overview of the CBD law if you're wanting to kind of get down into the weeds and see what the FDA is actually saying. But we work on a whole broad range of issues, from marijuana to firearms to healthcare, all working to, again, devolve power away from the federal government back to the states, which is what was intended in the first place. So check that out, 10thamendmentcenter.com. You can find my own personal work and my own podcast, which is called Thoughts from Maharrey Head. I do it every other week, and that's at michaelmaharrey.com. And I also post articles there from time to time. I've got a really good resource for people that are interested in the Constitution called Constitution 101 that you'll find on that page that goes through some of the various clauses in the Constitution, like the Supremacy Clause and the Necessary and Proper Clause, and explains what they actually were understood to mean during the ratification and at the time they were written. So there, if you're a Twitterer, I'm at mmaharrey 10th with the 10th. I'm a really bad Twitterer, but I am there. You won't see any great Twitter wars, like if you're a follower of Tom Woods or Mike Malice or somebody like that, but I'm there. And then if you're a Christian and you're interested in libertarianism, voluntarism, and Christianity and how those things intersect, I have a website called godarchy.org. And also do a podcast over there on Christianity and anarchism, basically. So not for everybody, but if that's your cup of tea, then definitely would love you to check that out. So, but 10th Amendment Center, that's the most important link. Check that one first.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mike, so much for coming on and being so generous with your time today.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure. And maybe in a few months, I'll be able to tell you that I finally beat the city of Lexington.
All right. Sounds good, man. Have a good one.
All right.
Hope you guys enjoyed today's episode of Felony Friday with Mike Maharrey. Mike is just a really cool guy, really laid-back guy to talk to. I always enjoy getting to pick his brain and ask him about issues such as what we talked about today with CBD oil and all of the regulations surrounding it. Hopefully you guys learned a lot from it. I know I did, and I actually came away with a lot of other questions too. I posted on my Facebook before this episode for questions for Mike, and actually a lot of questions came in after we recorded, but I did follow up with Mike on some of those questions, and he did point me in direction of a friend of his, a acquaintance that has maybe a little more knowledge in the dosing of CBD and different things like that, which I was getting a lot of questions about. So I think I will be bringing on another guest here within the next couple of weeks to really dive into the details of it, the science behind it, and really how it works, things like that. So look forward to that. That's exciting. And if you want to give me feedback on this show or any of my shows, as always, you can reach out to me. Well, probably a good way, the way I prefer you do it, is by joining the Lions of Liberty Forum on Facebook. Go in Facebook, punch Lions of Liberty Forum at the top, and join. And you can tag me in a post there if you have an article or something you want me to look at. Or you can email me. Email Felony Friday at lionsofliberty.com, and I will get back to you as quickly as possible. You can send over your guest ideas or anything like that. And so that's about it. I guess one thing I do want to note is we are Lions of Liberty. We're looking into, we're actually finalizing right now, an affiliate program with a CBD oil distributor. So we're going to be affiliated with a CBD company, and you'll be able to buy it through links that we have, and hopefully we'll be able to offer you some deal along the way there. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to work, but as soon as that's up, I will let you guys know. Hopefully for next week's episode, I'll have more information on that. And if you've tried CBD, if you haven't, if you're looking to try it out, you can check it out through our link. And of course, like I said earlier, I will effort to land another guest or two to get you guys some more information on CBD and the future of it and what we have coming down the pike here. So exciting stuff. I'm excited about it. And the only thing I'm going to say other than that is obviously I talk about supporting us on Patreon every single week. I would love if you guys did. You can go to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. Check out all the stuff there, and we appreciate your support. So that is it, guys. Hope you guys are enjoying your new year. We're all the way up into the second week of 2019. I can't believe it, and I hate the winter. Ready for spring. So let's keep this year moving along. That's it. All right, this is John Odermatt signing off. Always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.